The Unsightly Truths of Lorabi Co. present The Obsidian Pillar by Dustin Poindexter. Part 1. Castle on a Hill. This is an old tale, old as any yet writ, one of daring adventure, of courage, and of wit. A castle on a hill is where we'll begin to meet 5 orphan boys tucked safely within. The castle was broken, with furnishings bare. The toys that they did have needed repair. This bothered them not, their joy found each other. 5 siblings endured without father or mother. Declan was eldest, and by his logic most brave, destined to best scoundrels and knaves. In the castle, though, with none to be bested, designing departure for his mettle to be tested. He startled his brothers when he broke the big news, told them at lunch with big breaths and big chews. With naught but a sword he marched out the door. The brothers in castle now numbered 4. The next of the children was devoid of joy, had a sad little heart, and the name Fitzroy. Wishing only for his father and mother, a want unfilled by any castle or brother. Fitzroy packed his things while his siblings found play, eager to find parents, though wishing to stay. Bereft as he left, big tears blurring his sight, leaving 3 in the castle to play, smile, and fight. A humble Barnabas then, gracious and kind, the middle child, gifted with greatness of mind. He cherished his books, his tomes, and his scrolls. Yearning for knowledge, a notion arose. Thoughts became plans with each step mapped out. A simple calculus, a departure sans doubt. The boy cleaned his room and thanked each brother in turn. With 2 brothers left behind, he set out to learn. Late that night, as the castle slept, the second youngest tiptoed and crept, deathly quiet with his slight nimble frame, with stealth his best trait, and Zeke his best name. Having lofty goals to be like another, he snuck right out in pursuit of his brother. Zeke left through a window, pressing into the dark. A single brother slept on, in the quiet so stark. The last of them slept late through the morn. The one left behind, the last to be born. His name was Faust, and he cried, but a moment, not one to lament or languish in torment. Faust stiffened his lip and puffed out his chest. He too would be brave and accomplish his best, to keep the castle safe from any new threat, even though there were none just as of yet. The clouds gathered in close, high in the sky. They tumbled and rumbled, delighted to fly. What they did next, a foreboding surprise. They fell to the ground and started to rise. The clouds crawled up the hill with a stormy intent. Dedicated, transfixed, toward the castle they went. Upon reaching the dwelling, they stretched out their claws and consumed it greedily past massive smoke jaws. Where the castle once stood, up on the hill, was now very quiet, was now very still. With Faust trapped inside, the home became Stygian, replaced by a pillar of dark black obsidian. Part 2. Tales to Astound. Declan had wandered far from castle and hill, brawling and fighting just for the thrill. No longer a boy, but as a man just the same, with boastful brags and suspect claims. Northbound he went, through the heat and the cold, hearing a call for the brave and the bold. So onward he traveled, with old sword in tow. He had so much to prove, he had so much to show. Declan crossed bandits early in June, felling them quickly by light of the moon. Plucking a guitar, he stole from their camp, and singing to sleep a bridge troll that attacked. In taverns he'd gather ears to promote tales of himself. It was easy to gloat. He strummed his new instrument and sang his sweet song. Never thinking it a problem, some details were wrong. He sang of victory without suffering a scratch, with a lion opponent in a leg wrestling match. Of a sewing needle he used to poke holes in a tree against a woodpecker foe who conceded to he. With these tales at his back, into wind he marched forth, eager for the battles and prizes of the north. After ages of travel, Declan would finally find those famous 4 towers of the kingdom Aubrine. He marveled at the city and the palace it embraced, unknowing that his fables had preceded his haste. The king called him to his court to issue Declan a plea. From foreign invader he wished his captured daughter be freed. Declan snuck then at dusk when into their camps he silenced the guards and snuffed out the lamps. He rescued the princess from the general's tent. With an army pursuing, back to Aubrine they went. After her safe delivery back to her home, he led the king's army with one eye on his throne. Declan belted out orders over rabble and clatter. As his first real test, his foe's forces were shattered. Declan was called a hero before being named a prince, a declaration that made greedy politicians wince. Shortly thereafter, he was aptly betrothed to the princess he'd saved from the conqueror he'd deposed. The couple's quick wedding was hardly a surprise. It happened in tandem with the king's quick demise. No one could find a reason for the monarch's death. In his bedchambers at night he drew his last breath. A shadow was blamed for taking the king's life. Declan was crowned to a kingdom in strife. Even as he struggled with this governing test, he heard whispers of war abroad to the west. Part 3. Monsters and Machines. Fitzroy had lived for some time in the city of Stag, forced to cold, cruel streets, living only to beg. His search for his parents had roundly now failed, his outlook now dim, his hopes now curtailed. In the gutters of Stag, where he finally met friends, those being the monsters that society condemns. They too were rejected and forced to the shadows. Returning to light only promised the gallows. Fitzroy befriended these monsters and pitied their plight, and so he stayed by their side all through the night. Belton was a bespectacled minotaur with flashing green eyes. Josephine resembled a bird with wings made of knives. Near the darkened alley that these creatures called home, Fitzroy found a stuffed bear left by persons unknown. Fortunate was he, laying his eyes to the street, there stood a young girl, tears puddling at her feet. Moving his cloak to cover his worn, gruesome face, he gifted the bear, expecting a gesture of thanks. Out of the alley, exposed to the light of day, an unlucky gust of wind blew his concealment away. Rather than gratitude, the small face just trembled. The girl ran away, and a hateful crowd there assembled. They threw rocks and insults, unaware of his pain. He hurried back to the alley, wishing them slain. Calling them from every shadow, Fitzroy spoke with rage. For his monster allies, a rebellion he would stage. They envelop Stag in a torrent of fangs and claws to have their oppressors caged and create bestial laws. A city of spooks and monsters, fortified by human slaves, made to erect a wall, mortared with their graves. Taking the city quickly, due to advice they heeded, finding themselves an empty throne, a king was now needed. Fitzroy's beaten head was selected to occupy the crown. With plans to expand his dominion, the world he would drown. The sadness turned to hatred in the depths of his heart. Fitzroy knew where Barnabas was, the place he would start. Barnabas had settled in the sparkling town of Truday. Assisting an old machinist, he learned new things every day. Teaching him to tinker, even though his hands were weak, his age took his life when their bond was at its peak. Despite his awareness of his mentor's frail state, nothing could prepare for when his teacher met his fate. Barnabas was beset by grief. His mind began to turn to cure human mortality so no one would have to mourn. His thoughts and ambitions began to combine. Barnabas first needed peace, quiet, and time. The lives of Truday's people he endeavored to extend. A pervasive sleeping vapor was the means to his ends. With the town finally at rest, a metal helper he did craft. Moving citizenry to comfort was the machine's first task. He gave him a good name, one with a good sound, built for loyalty and so named Hound. They worked without tire to make 7 robot workers. Contracted without rest, they moved sleeping neighbors. With automatons on tedious tasks, he began to scheme. In the clock tower, he prepared the first steps of his dream. All had become silent, all had become still. Barnabas had caused it with his drive and his will. The only soft sounds that Truday now made were dogged machines working in sun and shade. Part 4. A Journey Home. It had been several months since Declan had been crowned. He'd earned the people's trust and his coveted renown, leaving with an army intent to start a quest to stop a demon lord in the lands off to the west. Along with many soldiers awaiting his command, he brought his 3 best swordsmen to make his mighty stand. Roland, Wick, and Wren were the very best in Aubrine, with disposition, though, to get a little wine blind. Although Declan had begged him to join in on the fight, Zeke had other plans, heading south that very night. The new king marched his army away toward victory. His brother a different direction, somewhat bitterly. Instead, he headed to a village that dwelled within the trees, drinking ale at a local pub to drown out vile deeds. In the shadows of Aubrine, Zeke ended many lives, making many widows out of many rivals' wives. To push brothers' ideals, he'd stolen and blackmailed. Adversaries of the king soon were quickly jailed. The former king received his dagger despite his desperate pleas, a heinous act he lamented to the highest of degrees. Shaking sorrows from his mind, returning to his task, he'd come to the village of Rel with questions there to ask. While quaffing his drink and eavesdropping overheard, a dark landmark had appeared, the horizon it had blurred. They swore a castle had been there before it arrived, now a pillar in that place, when they feared was alive. Needless to say, this caused Zeke quite a shock, fearing Faust may have stayed now trapped inside this rock. With this news, he swiftly moved, desirous to leave, but was stopped at the door before exit was achieved. A bandit girl felt empathy for this wayward soul, asking to accompany him and help him with his goal. Convenient was this packed bird, she was so named, with a moose as her steed, large but quite well tamed. The beast may travel easy over various terrain until their destination, the one that darkness stained. The land around the castle was barren, bleak, and dying. Darkened crystal walls prompted Zeke to break down crying. His wails were met in stereo from another voice inside. The traveling pair then realized that Faust had not yet died. Something strange then happened upon reaching that dark plain. The pillar vaporized to smoke, the castle bare again. Through the stone entrance he laid crumpled on the floor. Faust had shriveled to his frame and was reaching for the door. The rest of the castle was immune, it so appeared, but Faust had lost his sight. Behind empty eyes he peered. Strangely, still a child, he spoke clearly and with haste. Their warring brothers would soon lay many lives to waste. With foreboding prescience of devastation to unfold, the trio collected their transport and left with Faust paroled. Zeke looked back at the castle in its former state, trusting in his brother, hoping they weren't too late. Part 5. A Call to Arms. Weeks had passed since Trude dreamt. Mechanical workers hummed and bent metal to walls to protect the town, bent together machines to cover more ground. One of these vigilant robot patrols noticed something odd. Near their sleepy hamlet roamed a monster scouting squad. The violent skirmish ended with invading force confounded. Trude's metal guardians easily had them all surrounded. The distraught monster captain was spared to interrogate, revealing that a monster army would soon reach their gate. With this terrible news, Barnabas delayed his cogitation, clearly deducing conflict with no chance for mediation. The mounting monster horde breached the green horizon, so the city's fortifications the robots readily tightened. Opposing forces paused from direction from their sponsors. Barnabas saw that Fitzroy was the one who led the monsters. Fitzroy sat in ornate saddle on a giant serpent mount. It wildly bucked to no avail, as orders he did shout. Monsters gnawed and gnashed up on that grassy hill. Fitzroy now seemed a king, but a scared brother still. Determined to save his sibling from the pain he felt so deep, he'd defeat these new invaders and put them all to sleep. Before Barnabas could enact his plan, they started their attack, dulling his eager prospects to take his brother back. Barnabas climbed in a massive golem of his own construct. The enemy army path to town he planned to there obstruct. As steel clashed against fang, the battle seemed unending. Neither held distinct advantage, both forces proved unbending. So, Fitzroy's army retreated to set camp for the night. Barnabas repaired his soldiers, seeing no end in sight. A brutal standoff that showed no signs of slowing. Fearsome was the fight, and bound to keep on growing. To this quagmire another variable added. Aubrine's army across the river joined the brutal ballad. Not knowing who led the foes, Declan saw the power of two mighty armies in this stark twilight hour. Advisors encouraged him to delay Aubrine's engagement. They first would send emissaries seeking peaceful arrangement. Flying from the monster camp and heading toward his realm, Declan spied a bright white dragon through his iron helm. The beast swam through the skies with power, grace, and might. Declan climbed a sleeping trebuchet to see this monster's flight. On the dragon's back a rider with reins tightly gripped. Distracted from his makeshift perch, Declan's footing thusly slipped. This caused a terrible fall with no way to arrest. A bright light shone from below, and Declan it did ingest. Safe from a painful fall, the blue portal curdled and popped, leaving as quickly as it came with the king who had been dropped. As the portal fizzled away with its royal human prize, the camp was eerie and quite still to soldiers' dreaming eyes. When dawn broke and the army woke, their king could not be found. Their emissaries caged and gassed, so they marched to battleground. Part 6. Family Reunion. With rising sun to their backs, monster ranks filled in tight. An anxious Fitzroy chewed his nails, nervous for the fight. Barnabas welded a finishing bead on a giant mechanical spider. The robots booted up their systems, spreading defenses wider. Roland led Aubrine's troops to battle as a general ad tempest. They marched in mourning toward feral king and foul robot chemist. 3 armies now stood, poised for the battle to begin. Kingdoms of monsters and machines now joined by one of men. Over the last hill toward the factions, Faust and rescuers raced. Would they deliver warning in time, or would war best their pace? Silence spread over the valley before the inciting shot was made. When human archer loosed early arrow, a werewolf could not evade. All forces poured into the valley like water filling a bath. The only thing more brutal would be the aftermath. Ren cried out in desperation when a giant stomped Wick like grist. Belton took cover under a wagon. War revealed this pacifist. A quarter of the monster army was suddenly reduced to ash when Hound introduced a lightning machine, striking in a flash. Roland dashed across the field, felling robots and beasts alike. Though he led the men with stoic charm, he mostly loved the fight. Dragons and wyverns roasted men with their hot fire breath. Archers rained clouds of arrows, beneath them only death. There were no clear battle lines when Zeke's party joined the fray. Their moose collapsed exhausted, they'd ridden all night and day. Zeke sprinted into the fray to find the brother he admired so. Bird led Faust to find Barnabas, whom his vision he would show. Stumbling without his sight, being guided by hand and arm, with bow staff and daggers in mass, she fought off wounds and harm. As Fitzroy screamed orders, the air around him warmed. From a bright blue portal, Declan emerged transformed. With wrinkled skin and long gray beard, his eyes were wise with time. He'd seen the outcome of the fight. He knew the whole design. Declan gave his brother a loving, strong embrace, surprising the monster king, who found tears upon his face. Having been so long since he belonged, realizing war was madness, he'd only begun the gruesome fight to defeat his profound sadness. Faust had demonstrated to Barnabas the folly of his quest, showcasing the lives that had been lost. This course was not the best. Faust, Bird, and Barnabas now went to find warring generals, using a new armistice to recruit war-weary individuals. This coalition reached Fitzroy and Declan, in tandem with Zeke as well. The brothers, united once again, the violence would soon be quelled. Only Declan, not Faust, knew what would happen next. He closed his eyes as Josephine buried wings into his chest. Faust fell down to his knees. A pedantic Barnabas lost his breath. Zeke howled across the valley distraught by his brother's death. Bird covered her mouth with a hand as the fighting seemed to cease. Declan had died to stop the war, this time the cost for peace. Fitzroy found his family only to have it stolen again. Would his suffering ever quit? Would his torment ever end? In this present devastation, another oddity took place. Dark black clouds coalesced above, and a path to ground they traced. As the dark shroud dropped, it convulsed and took form, not as a beast, but as a man, with an aura very warm. This man who'd come from the skies, a connection felt inherent, placing a hand on Fitzroy's shoulder, confirming him their parent. Distracted by a father return, Josephine escaped to the skies. He brought the brothers close and looked into their eyes. Then in an instant disappeared in a gigantic smoky swell. Fitzroy, Faust, and Declan's body vanishing as well. Part 7, Strong Currents. The war had then ended with the Battle of Truday, punctuated by loss and 3 brothers whisked away. Those who remained afterwards enjoyed a well-earned truce. Barnabas and Zeke, though, had mysteries to deduce. Truday began reconstructing, with Hound now at the helm. Roland signed on to help the machine and to monitor the realm. Bird returned to her family. Turmoil they'd caused again. A bandit troop of much renown, a trait she hoped to dim. Wren had lost her gentle lover, now yearning to disappear. Belton was confirmed a coward. He left to face his fear. No one had seen Josephine since she fled into the sky, of which was now a crimson hue, leaving all to wonder why. 2 years slowly passed as the pair of brothers searched. Then to see their child nephew back to Aubrine they traversed. The Queen of Aubrine greeted them, reluctantly from the throne. Rumors cast doubt and discord. Declan's son was not his own. Otherwise, seeing the kingdom fine, the brothers southward went, then back to their childhood home, where they found another scent. Moving to a river trading town, small, but named Empire, up 1,000-mile jumping river, a ship they looked to hire. The very best had just docked, the brothers eager to recruit, a skipper with a merry laugh and a skill of good repute. It was then they met Captain Bentley, who was perfect for the role. He chortled when the brothers asked. They lacked funds to pay his toll. Their worries were allayed soon after by another traveling pair, sisters Ireland and Arabella, who agreed to split the fare. Both wizards on a mission to find a hidden arcane script. Using thorough maps and divination, up the river they'd be shipped. The river swelled and buckled as they started their charted trip. Bentley laughed as the waters screamed. He trusted this old ship. Some parts of the river were very wide, beyond a person's sight. Others then seemed to be on fire, radiating through the night. They passed a curious section with water flowing slowly like sand. Another yet with violent tribes that kept them off the land. So they slept out on the ferry till their weary bodies ached, fatigued and unprepared for him, the giant Blue River Snake. He emerged from muddy waters, demanding 6 unsightly truths. Only with tales that satisfied, Lorabi Co. would see them loose. The travelers hesitated over what they'd like to say. Ireland made the first admission in a hurry to be on her way. She boldly told the serpent she drank her weight in booze. Arabella then submitted. She enjoyed a lazy snooze. Zeke stepped forward with admission of his dark subversion. Barnabas declared he only read to relieve him from the boredom. Bentley shared his love of sweets, relayed with a tasty chuckle. The final truth he then revealed caused the party to slightly buckle. He'd been a captain on this river, For the last 200 years, it stood to reason then why he laughed away his fears. These revelations allowed their passage, with serpent satiated. Lorabi always hungers for the truth, as this crew articulated. The snake slipped back in the water, leaving Zeke a nasty shiver. They'd only gone 100 miles up that 1,000-mile river. Part 8. Love, Loss, and Lineage. Fitzroy awoke, blinking the scene into his eyes. The details he could not divine, Faust was ready to surmise. Their spectre of a father had magicked them to hear, a place barren of life and love, this much was roundly clear. Flora in all directions was dead or quickly dying, and the only hint of fauna was a fawn loudly crying. In the midst of all this, a pristine marble altar, centered on the slab there, their peaceful eldest brother. Declan lay there without motion, upon cold, hardened stone. They would never see him alive, to sit on Obrine's throne. And while they reasoned in this strange and dreary place, a mist collected near them to form their father's face. As his body coalesced, Fitzroy leapt up to attack, his fist striking naught but air. Solid form his father lacked. Screaming at the apparition, he demanded answers known. Why were they all abandoned in the castle all alone? Where was their ghostly father when they needed him the most? Found in profound absence when Fitzroy played Fury's host. Or when Barnabas lost his mentor, and sanity consequently, Faust had now been blinded as their castle's lonely sentry. That could be forgiven. Their turmoil and their strife. Why not descend sooner, though, to save Declan's life? The figure stood contemplating, introspective and very still. Then an explanation of their woes and malicious mother's will. He and her were foolish lovers in a time long since past. With ancient magic they'd made a pact to see their union last. Then of their love and to them 5 beautiful boys were born. But as was written in the pact, from parents they were torn. Stolen away by destiny to a castle carefully hidden. Unless they left by their own choice, ageless bodies they were given. Mother and father sought them out with daunting desperation. His efforts were more cautious, hers struck as much more brazen. Her humanity she gave away in exchange for dreadful power. She reddened the sky and darkened the sea, warping the world sour. Their sons she would not recognize, she had gone much too wild. He mastered transformations to protect her and each small child. It took most of his will to enshroud her in a soothingly gentle embrace, but as monstrosities came from her red sky, he knew he must keep pace. Sacrificing body to become the clouds, he muted out crimson skies, and there they waited for centuries, cursing those magical lies. The castle became known to them as soon as Declan crossed the moat. Mother claimed them as impostors, while Fitzroy left by boat. Barnabas traveled with an acting troupe, while from the sky she growled. They hardly noticed Zeke depart, mother's malice was profound. Father could not contain her, as she shared an awful thought. She'd pit her sons against each other, puppeteering an awful plot. So quickly father stretched his form to the castle from the skies. He struck a deal for prophecy, trading the vision of young Faust's eyes. With father taxed to exhaustion, mother took on deceitful forms to manipulate her offspring and to satisfy her scorn. Becoming a sad young girl in stag, a machinist nearing death, the envy in a boy's kind heart, and a hubris that knew no depth. Zeke freed Faust from the castle, father's vigor then returned. He abandoned his garrison of the sky when of Declan's death he learned. They then were delivered to this place, even though they were not ready, with a father who had searched for them, his heart now much less heavy. Part 9. Cannot and Never Will. Bentley docked the ship at last. At mile 882, the wizards and brothers disembarked, bidding their guide adieu. On their way, he implored they laugh, no matter what they see. As he left, he laughed as well, the jolly Captain Bentley. The sisters sought a secret altar where ancient script was written, deep within a darkened forest where they suspected it was hidden. So they traveled with the brothers, whose trail had gone cold, and met a merchant by the river who desired their pockets gold. Clad in a mask shaped like a fish, selling bright green river water, claiming knowledge of great import, should they accept her channeled offer. Reluctantly, they paid her price, so she charted out their course. She begged they hurry on their way, as the weather was getting worse. Her forecast was on the mark. From red sky small droplets fell, and as they plummeted to the earth, their size did greatly swell. In landing, some were as large as a horse, the water sloshing away, revealing inside beasts of the skies, now stomping in mud and clay. As unnerving as this sight was, to the party it was now common. The forest whispered to them, and further they were drawn in. Arabella was first to reach the cavern that snaked through mountain range. With torches lit they crept inside, unaware their fates would change. Damp cave air held a secret for those that dared maneuver. As they stumbled through the dark, it would steal a pleasant future. A doting child, or priceless treasure, perhaps a star-crossed lover, adventures made, a hero revered, or just a filling supper. So, one by one, they were robbed, without their knowledge or consent, of some unknown joyous thing, and from the caves they went. Next they carefully trekked through a village destroyed by fire, its residents now ghostly specters, howling their eerie ire. As they left the haunted town, Zeke sent spying eyes, watching them as they marched, from the trees or even skies. His focus shifted as they emerged from forest to lifeless plain, an altar with 2 missing siblings and the eldest brother slain. The wizards were introduced. Barnabas and Fitzroy shook hands. Zeke wept against Declan's chest in these bleak and distant lands. The reunion with their father was long awaited, but cut short. As sightless Faust cleared his throat, he had a danger to report. From up above would soon come a maternal terror hidden, coming quick to best them all and make fraternal acquisition. Combined strength with Declan's help, and this threat so deftly muted, brothers would see a soothing calm, a family newly rooted. The group was rightly shocked, but given no time to mull, as Josephine landed without grace, cracking stone with her fall. She stood in obvious pain, some feathers falling to ground, in torment with her head thrown back, screeching an awful sound. Between her bladed feathers, dark red bubbled and oozed. In a puddle around her talons, miasma her body refused. With this excretion exercised, she cried out in dismay. Her body was her own again. Again she flew away. The substance trembled furiously. It moved and mashed in close. Red tendrils pillared upward, forming a fearsome host. Still gyrating and gestating, eyes wide was every brother, excepting Faust and Declan. At present stood their mother. Part 10. Truculent Persons. A tendril wrapped around Declan, pulling him from the stone. With broadsword Zeke cleaved it away. To the ground Declan was thrown, hissing at her sons as she was cut. Mother snarled that they weren't real, a gift she'd give her children's souls. These bodies she'd rightly steal. Fitzroy screamed for Mother to stop, to leave Declan alone. They had to go so far away just to find this broken home. Father reached out to calm her. Her body his passed right through. Unable to save his children or bride, he didn't know what to do. Barnabas threw a metal canister that rolled to Mother's feet. It cracked open to release a gas designed to make her sleep. The effect was less than meager. As she knocked him to the ground, Zeke bravely charged her once again after Barnabas was downed. The sister wizards stepped back as Mother and siblings fought, for on the bed where Declan laid was the inscription that they sought. Ireland began sketching glyphs from the side facing the west. To the east, Arabella did the same. Both hurried their very best. An errant tendril then struck Ireland across her unguarded throat. She reacted in her defense with a piercing lightning bolt. This duel of magics was very brief, as Mother was incensed. With concussive blast and blinding light, the sisters were dispensed. She thrust them to the skies, both with half inscription branded. Separated to the east and west, alone once they landed. Hoping to obscure her sight, Father became a dark, thick mist, to hide his other sons from view and free Zeke to thus resist. And so Zeke persevered, as he parried and as he lunged, but Mother soaked up all his efforts like a greedy, evil sponge. This caused him then to falter in his own resolve. How would he defeat his mother as this fight did evolve? Badly bruised and exhausted, Zeke fell upon his knees. She would have her way then. No one could hear his pleas. At that moment, through the mist, a light shone faintly blue. A silhouette struck with a lance, Zeke dumbfounded as to who. The figure hurried closer. In disbelief, Zeke rubbed his eyes. There appeared his brother Declan. Did he imagine his demise? He grabbed his brother's hand when Mother reared back to strike. Her blow was knocked aside by another Declan look-alike. The blue light in the mist pulsated brilliantly and wild, until it exploded the haze away to the view of each grown child. There they saw a dozen Declans of disparate age and wear, and more were still emerging through rifts torn in the air. 2 Declans helped Faust and Barnabas back onto their feet. Hoping Fitzroy would quiet his yell, another did entreat. 3 Declans claimed their older body, grabbing 2 legs and 1 arm. Strange it was to carry oneself away from perilous harm. The rest reprieved Zeke in battle. Driving their mother back, they pushed her advantage to the side, allaying her attack. She jumped to the empty altar, vying for better position, but Declan's crushed the altar to bits. No quarter was she given. By doppelgangers she was surrounded. In defeat she sadly wailed. She cried for children she'd never hold, her motherhood curtailed. Zeke steeled his own conviction to still Mother's beating heart. He raised his sword and clenched his teeth. Now his mourning could finally start. Before the final blow was made, and Declan thus avenged, Fitzroy rushed his way between them. Mother he would defend. Zeke's judgment was in motion, with no chance to be attuned. The blade struck Fitzroy in Mother's place, inflicting a mortal wound. Part 11. A scribe for every occasion. Fitzroy fell back into Mother's arms, a sacrifice unexpected. Though she loathed his deep deceit, to him she was now indebted. She called out to her family, her anger turning to haste, desperate now to save the life of the young man she embraced. Barnabas pushed through the crowd to apply a restoring balm, with consternation on his face, worried without calm. Zeke's weapon fell from his hand. Fitzroy would not recover. At his fault and by his rage he'd lose another brother. Father drifted to mother and rested formless hand upon her cheek, helping to hold Fitzroy as well. His son's breath was getting weak. Fitzroy smiled and cried profoundly as his vision became dim. He'd finally found his missing parents. At last, they too found him. A haze began to build around them, blurring their special moment, their forms colliding quietly from the cloudy mist encroachment. As father's body became the fog, mother too became unformed, filling in the space between all three persons now absorbed. The hazy sight began to grow, though difficult to see, until obscurant flitted away to reveal a lone birch tree. With a palette filched from mother, it was mostly a crimson hue. Gray streaks also ran through its bark, inspired by father too. Barnabas looked up through the bough to notice the red sky was cracked. Large chunks like glass fell to the ground with a sizable impact. Above now shone a clear blue sky, without clouds or vile beasts. Zeke, Barnabas, and Faust all closed their eyes to soak in welcome peace. They buried Declan beneath the birch, a place Faust said was fitting. They deeply cried and eulogized. He'd rest there with his sibling. One by one, the other Declans crossed through portals that opened and closed to return to a time and place of their own, Barnabas pondered and supposed. Zeke decided to stay and protect the site as long as he drew his breath. Interlopers would wisely turn away unless they desired death. Failing to protect one of his brothers, another he'd outright slain. His guilt and his duty kept him there to patrol this stark domain. Barnabas helped Faust to Aubrine, and the young prince he'd there advise. His looks deceive as Faust too seemed a youth. Time would prove him wise. The two would grow close together, a kinship they'd have and foster. With Faust there to see things yet to be, the kingdom would surely prosper. And that left only just Barnabas. His travel briefly delayed. On his way back to Serene True Day, he was caught by an ambuscade. By monsters of all sizes and stripes. With his life he barely escaped. The event inspired a change of course. A new plan began to take shape. He'd head instead to his childhood home. The castle would serve his means, to keep his books and research there, filling halls with his machines. It was at the castle he met myself, a tenant to him unknown. I'd lived with them as children, always hidden and never shown. Barnabas kindly shared with me the tale of his family's woes, and his plan to purge the monsters, these newfound wild foes. I kept him company as he worked, and as he worked I wrote the story of him and his kin, every detail I took note. Once completed, I bound the scroll, and then affixed it to a cat, who would deliver this strange account to a collector of things like that. I am a child of Lorabi Co., and allow me to introduce the brothers Perdita and their yarn, one of his unsightly truths. Thank you so much for listening to my fairy tale. I am so incredibly honored that you allowed me to share it with you. You can listen to it as much as you'd like, but if you did enjoy it and you want to support the sequels, other stories in the series, and myself, the entire fairy tale is on sale now in both ebook and physical formats. You can find it with the attached links and your favorite online retailers. Also, be sure to follow the story and other project progress. Again, check out the attached links. If nothing else, sharing this with someone you think would enjoy it, well, that would mean the world to me. And let me know what you think. I cannot wait to talk to you about this book, about this story, about these characters. Again, thank you so much.